For 10 years, I lived under the belief that Claire and I had built something extraordinary, a life many would envy. We had the picture-perfect suburban home with its white picket fence and carefully manicured lawn. Neighbors would nod approvingly, and our families often praised us as the couple who made it. It felt like every piece of our life fit neatly into place. Claire was the ambitious, bubbly one, an event coordinator who seemed to thrive under pressure. I was quieter, a more introspective guy, but I loved her drive and energy. We balanced each other, or so I thought. Claire was magnetic, and people naturally gravitated toward her. It didn't bother me when she worked late. I figured her job demanded it. She loved planning elaborate weddings, galas, and fundraisers, and I was proud of her success. But looking back, maybe I should have noticed how quickly those late nights started piling up. At first, the cracks were so subtle that they were easy to dismiss. A missed text here, a rushed conversation there. She became protective of her phone, keeping it face down or glued to her hand. When I asked about it, she'd wave me off, saying, "Work's crazy right now. You wouldn't understand." I believed her because, well, why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I thought. Then came the night everything changed. I was heading to bed when her phone, left unattended for once, buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message preview, and my stomach knotted instantly. "Lucas. Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." The words burned into my mind, and I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake her upstairs. Part of me wanted to storm into our bedroom, phone in hand, demanding an explanation. But something held me back. I couldn't face her until I knew the truth. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with every possible scenario. Was it just a misunderstanding? Could it be a work-related thing that sounded worse than it was? By morning, I had made my decision. I needed answers, and I'd find them without tipping her off. I didn't want to confront her blindly. I needed undeniable proof. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator, a guy named Grant. He wasn't anything like the slick detectives you see in movies. Grant was gruff and no-nonsense, the type who got the job done without sugarcoating it. When I explained the situation, he gave me a long, assessing look before nodding. "This could be nothing," he said, "but if it's something, I'll find out." The waiting was agonizing. Every time Claire smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, I felt like a fool. Was I imagining it, or was her affection forced? I hated the paranoia, but the message from Lucas played on a loop in my head. About a week later, Grant called. "Got something. We should meet." We met at a diner on the edge of town. He slid a manila envelope across the table, and I hesitated before opening it. My hands trembled as I sifted through the contents. Grainy photographs of Claire with a man I'd never seen before. They weren't doing anything overtly damning, but the way they leaned into each other at a dimly lit restaurant spoke volumes. My stomach churned, but I kept going. Hotel receipts with her name, time-stamped to nights she claimed to be working late. Finally, a video. "Watch it when you're ready," Grant said, his voice softer than I expected. Later that night, after Claire had gone to bed, I braced myself and pressed play on the video. It was short but devastating. Claire and the man, Lucas, locked in a passionate kiss in a parking lot. She wasn't just kissing him. It was the way she kissed him, like he was the center of her world. I slammed the laptop shut, a cold fury coursing through me. This wasn't just a mistake. This was betrayal, calculated and deliberate. Any doubts I had clung to were obliterated. The woman I had spent a decade loving, the woman I thought I knew, was living a double life. The rage was almost too much to contain, but I forced myself to think clearly. Storming into our bedroom and confronting her wasn't enough. I needed her to understand the full weight of what she had done, to feel the humiliation, the betrayal, the anger I was drowning in. And then, an idea began to take shape. Something that would expose the truth for everyone to see, not just her but the people who thought they knew her best. Once the fury settled into a cold resolve, I started planning. This wasn't going to be a private confrontation with shouting and tears. No, Claire had made me look like a fool, and she was going to face the consequences in front of everyone who believed in our perfect marriage. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Our 10th wedding anniversary was coming up, and Claire had been gushing about throwing a grand celebration. "Let's make it special," she'd said, eyes sparkling. She wanted both our families there, along with friends and colleagues. A room full of people who admired her, oblivious to what she really was. I played along, masking my anger behind forced smiles. "That's a great idea," I told her. "Let's go all out." Inside, I was already envisioning how I'd turn this event into something unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. Claire threw herself into the planning. She spent late nights poring over menus, obsessing over decorations, and hand-picking the guest list. She even asked me for input, but I let her take the reins, knowing the irony would hit harder when her lies unraveled in front of everyone she wanted to impress. While she planned the decor, I handled the tech. I borrowed a projector from a friend and set it up discreetly in the banquet hall, claiming it was for a special slideshow. Nobody questioned it. I also worked with Grant to compile the evidence. The text messages, photos, receipts, and that damning video. The goal wasn't just to expose Claire but to do it in a way that left no room for doubt or denial. On the morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, straightening my tie. My reflection stared back at me, a man I barely recognized. There was no warmth in my eyes, no trace of the love I used to feel for Claire. It was replaced by a steely determination. Tonight, the truth would come out. When I walked downstairs, Claire was rushing around, checking last-minute details. She looked stunning in her sapphire dress, the one that matched her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of what might have been, how perfect everything could have been if she just stayed loyal. But that moment passed quickly. "Ready for tonight?" she asked, her voice bright and hopeful. "Oh, I'm ready," I said, forcing a smile. If she noticed the edge in my tone, she didn't show it. By evening, the banquet hall was packed. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone who mattered to Claire, filled the room, laughing and toasting to what they believed was a celebration of love and commitment. I mingled, playing the part of the devoted husband, but my mind was focused on the toast I'd be giving later. When the time came, Claire practically glowed as she introduced me to the crowd. "My amazing husband, Ethan," she said, her voice filled with pride. The applause was loud and genuine, but I barely heard it as I took the microphone. I raised my glass and smiled at the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means the world to Claire and me to have our loved ones here to celebrate 10 incredible years of marriage." I glanced at Claire, who smiled warmly, clearly expecting some flowery speech about how much she meant to me. Instead, I turned to the projector. "But tonight isn't just about celebrating our love. It's about truth." The first image appeared on the screen, a text message from Lucas. Gasps rippled through the room, and Claire's smile faltered. "Some of you may think you know us, but let me show you the reality of what this marriage has become." Slide after slide revealed the evidence. Photos of Claire and Lucas, the hotel bookings, the video of their kiss. The room was silent except for the occasional gasp or muffled whisper. I didn't look at Claire. I couldn't. I could feel the weight of her panic, her humiliation, as the truth unraveled in front of everyone she held dear. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by Claire's sharp intake of breath. I finally turned to face her, and the look on her face was a mixture of shock, anger, and desperation. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. "Ethan, please," she stammered, her voice trembling as she reached out toward me. Her perfect composure, so carefully maintained over the years, was crumbling in front of everyone. "Please what, Claire?" I snapped, my voice cutting through the tense air. "Please stop telling the truth? Please save you from facing the consequences of your lies." I looked out at the crowd. Family, friends, colleagues. People who had always admired Claire, who had celebrated our love. Their faces were a mix of disbelief, pity, and anger. Claire's father stood up, his voice booming. "Claire, is this true? Answer me." She turned toward him, shaking her head as tears streamed down her face. "Dad, it's not what it looks like. I can explain." "Not what it looks like?" I shot back, my tone laced with venom. "You don't accidentally end up in a hotel room with another man, Claire. You don't accidentally send messages like these or kiss someone like that." Her mother clutched her chest, visibly shaken, while her siblings exchanged stunned glances. Friends whispered among themselves, some already standing to leave, too uncomfortable to stay and watch the fallout. "I love you, Ethan," Claire suddenly cried, stepping toward me. "I made a mistake, but it doesn't change how much I love you. We can fix this. Please don't do this here." I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? You call this love? Lying to me, betraying me, sneaking around behind my back? You've been making me look like an idiot for God knows how long. That's not love, Claire. That's selfishness." The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "These are divorce papers," I said, my voice firm and steady. "I've already signed them. You should too." Lucas's wife received a similar package earlier this week. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. "You told his wife?" "Of course I did," I said coldly. "She deserves to know the truth just as much as I do." Claire's father stepped closer, his voice low and furious. "How could you do this, Claire? How could you destroy your family like this?" Claire turned to her father, then her mother, then the rest of the room, as if searching for someone, anyone who would defend her. But no one did. I set the envelope on the table in front of her. "You can keep this," I said. Then I turned to the crowd, addressing them one last time. "Thank you all for coming. I think we're done here." With that, I walked out of the room, my steps slow but steady. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. Claire's sobs, her mother's cries, and the murmur of guests trying to process what they had just witnessed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. The truth was out. Claire could no longer hide behind lies and excuses. As I stepped out of the banquet hall, the cool night air hit me like a cleansing wave. My mind raced, but my steps remained deliberate. Each stride felt like shedding a weight I'd been carrying for too long. Behind me, the muffled chaos from the party began to fade. Claire's frantic sobs, her father's angry voice, the low hum of shocked whispers. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, taking deep breaths to steady myself. I wasn't sure what I felt: relief, anger, sadness? Maybe all of it. But one thing was clear. This chapter of my life was over. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The house we shared was still tainted with memories, and the thought of walking through those doors made me feel sick. Instead, I checked into a modest motel on the edge of town. The room was small and plain, but it felt like a safe haven. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion finally catching up to me. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Texts and calls poured in. Family, friends, even some colleagues who'd heard about the spectacle. I ignored most of them, but one message caught my eye. It was from Claire's father. "I don't know what to say, Ethan. I'm sorry for what my daughter has done. You didn't deserve this. If you ever need anything, please reach out." I appreciated his words, but I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Later that day, Grant called to check in. "Saw the news," he said, his gravelly voice tinged with curiosity. "You all right?" "Define all right," I replied dryly. He chuckled softly. "Fair enough. Look, I just wanted to say you handled it better than most people would have. If you need help with the next steps, divorce proceedings, custody issues, I've got a guy who's solid." I thanked him, though custody wasn't a concern. Claire and I didn't have kids, and for that, I was grateful. This mess would have been so much worse if children were involved. As the days passed, the fallout from the anniversary party unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Claire's family was furious with her, and her friends started distancing themselves. Even her workplace wasn't immune, rumors spread, and her professional reputation began to suffer. Lucas wasn't spared either. His wife, armed with the evidence I'd sent, had already filed for divorce. She took their kids and left him to deal with the wreckage of his own making. Word got around that Lucas's employer wasn't happy about the scandal, and soon enough, he was out of a job. And me? I focused on moving forward. I met with a lawyer and finalized the divorce papers. I stayed in the motel for a few weeks, giving myself time to adjust before moving back into the house. When I returned, I stripped it of everything that reminded me of Claire. Her photos, her clothes, even the little trinkets she'd collected over the years. I wanted a fresh start. One evening, as I painted over the bedroom walls, I realized how cathartic it was to erase the physical remnants of our life together. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a part of myself. But rebuilding wasn't just about the house. I started therapy, a small but significant step toward processing everything that had happened. I took up hiking, something I hadn't done in years, and rediscovered my love for photography. I even planned a solo trip to Iceland, a place I'd always wanted to visit. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. Iceland was everything I hoped it would be: vast, untouched, and brutally honest in its beauty. The cold, sharp air felt cleansing, like I was breathing in a new life. Standing at the edge of a glacier or watching the northern lights dance across the sky, I felt small but not insignificant. It was a reminder that life, even after betrayal, was expansive and full of possibilities. When I returned, I was calmer, more grounded. The bitterness was still there, but it no longer consumed me. Therapy helped with that. Talking to someone who didn't know Claire or Lucas, who only cared about how I was handling it, was liberating. My therapist encouraged me to focus on what I wanted for my future, not just what I was leaving behind. I threw myself into rebuilding, starting with small, manageable steps. I joined a local hiking group, forcing myself to be around people again. At first, I was hesitant, afraid of the inevitable questions about why I was there alone. But as it turned out, most of them were just looking for company on the trails and didn't pry. One Saturday morning, while scaling a modest hill with the group, I met Isabel. She wasn't flashy or overly confident. In fact, she seemed a little shy, with her curly brown hair tucked under a knit hat and a laugh that came easily but softly. We ended up walking side by side, talking about everything from favorite books to travel stories. She wasn't like Claire. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or dominate the conversation. She just listened and shared, and before I knew it, I was laughing in a way I hadn't in months. After the hike, she waved goodbye but lingered, as if waiting for something. I took the chance. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. Her face lit up. "I'd like that." We met the following week at a small cafe downtown. It was unassuming, just like her, but warm and inviting. Over cups of coffee, we talked for hours. Isabel was a kindergarten teacher, and her stories about her students had me laughing so hard I nearly spilled my drink. She had a way of seeing the world that was both practical and optimistic, and it felt refreshing. For the first time since everything with Claire, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living again. We didn't rush into anything. Isabel was careful, and I was grateful for that. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of the marriage that had defined my life for so long. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized how much I looked forward to seeing her. One evening, after dinner at her place, she asked me about Claire. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said, her voice gentle. I hesitated, but then I told her everything. The affair, the anniversary party, the fallout. She listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of empathy and quiet anger on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "You didn't deserve that," she said simply. Her words, so direct and sincere, hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been carrying the weight of betrayal, questioning if I could have done something differently, if I was somehow to blame. Hearing her say that lifted a burden I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. Isabel wasn't a replacement for Claire. She was her own person, kind, grounded, and genuinely supportive. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where happiness wasn't just a fleeting memory but something I could build again, brick by brick. Months passed, and life began to feel stable again, if not exactly normal, then something close to it. Isabel and I continued to take things slow, spending time hiking, cooking together, and sharing quiet evenings talking about our lives and dreams. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had someone who made me feel genuinely cared for without expectations or conditions. But as much as I was moving forward, there were still pieces of my past I needed to confront. I hadn't seen or spoken to Claire since I left that banquet hall. The divorce was finalized without any real drama. Claire signed the papers without resistance, which told me she understood there was no coming back. Still, a part of me felt unfinished. Then one day, as I walked through the local farmer's market, I saw her. She was standing by a stall selling handmade soaps, her once polished appearance looking a little worn. Her hair was pulled back messily, and there was a tiredness in her eyes I didn't recognize. She noticed me before I could turn away. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she took a hesitant step forward, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice uncertain. I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Claire." Her eyes darted around, avoiding direct contact with mine. "I was hoping I'd run into you someday. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I crossed my arms, waiting for her to continue. She took a shaky breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I've had a lot of time to think, and I know I messed up. No, I ruined everything. Not just with you but with everyone. My family, my friends. Even Lucas doesn't talk to me anymore." The mention of his name made my jaw tighten, but I stayed silent. "I guess I just needed to tell you," she said, her voice trembling, "that I know what I did to you was wrong. And I'm sorry. For all of it." For a moment, I studied her face. There were no excuses this time, no attempts to deflect or justify her actions. Just regret and exhaustion. "I appreciate that," I said finally. My tone was measured but not unkind. "But it's too late, Claire. Too much damage has been done." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. For whatever that's worth." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something important. I didn't feel anger anymore. There was no hatred, no burning desire for revenge. Just a strange kind of emptiness, a void where my love for her used to be. "Take care of yourself, Claire," I said, my voice steady. She blinked, clearly surprised by my calmness, then gave a small nod. "You too, Ethan." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure settle over me. Her apology didn't erase the pain, but it wasn't meant to. It wasn't for her, either, it was for me, a final acknowledgement that what we had was over, and that was okay. That evening, as Isabel and I sat on the couch watching a movie, she leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need answers or closure from Claire. I had all the closure I needed right here, in the life I was starting to build again. Life settled into a rhythm. A good one. Isabel and I weren't rushing anything, but there was a comfort in the consistency of our connection. We made plans without feeling the pressure of expectation, whether it was a weekend hike or a lazy Sunday spent baking cookies that inevitably turned out slightly burnt. One crisp fall afternoon, we were walking through the park, the leaves crunching under our boots. Isabel stopped suddenly and turned to me, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Can I ask you something?" she said, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Of course," I replied, bracing for whatever question was weighing on her mind. "Do you ever feel scared?" Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "About starting over, I mean. About this." She gestured between us. Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For all her strength and kindness, it was easy to forget that she had her own fears and insecurities. "All the time," I admitted. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust anyone again, let alone feel this hopeful. "But you've made it easier. Safer." She smiled, her eyes softening. "You've made it easier for me, too. I just wanted you to know that." We continued walking, the conversation settling into a comfortable silence. But her words stayed with me. Hopeful. That was exactly how I felt, even if I hadn't realized it until that moment. A few weeks later, Isabel invited me to meet her parents. It felt like a big step, bigger than either of us wanted to admit, but I was ready. When we arrived at their cozy, modest home, her father greeted me with a firm handshake, while her mother gave me a warm smile that instantly put me at ease. Over dinner, we talked about everything from Isabel's childhood antics to my recent trip to Iceland. Her parents were welcoming, but they didn't hesitate to ask direct questions. "So," her father said, fixing me with a steady gaze, "what are your intentions with our daughter?" The question was old-fashioned, but I respected it. I set down my fork and met his gaze. To treat her with the respect and care she deserves. To be honest with her. And to build something real, at whatever pace feels right for both of us. Isabel's mother smiled approvingly, while her father gave a satisfied nod. "Good answer," he said gruffly, but there was a twinkle in his eye. Later that night, as we drove back to my place, Isabel reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" I asked, glancing at her. "For showing them the man I already know you are." The holidays came quickly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel dread at the thought of celebrating. Isabel and I hosted a small gathering at my place, inviting a mix of her friends and my hiking group. It wasn't extravagant, but it was warm and lively, filled with laughter and good food. At one point during the evening, Isabel caught me staring at her as she chatted with one of my friends. She raised an eyebrow, smiling. "What?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The moment felt ordinary, yet extraordinary in its simplicity. She was proof that life could rebuild itself, that trust could grow again, that love wasn't a finite resource. As the guests left and the house quieted, Isabel sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting on mine. "This feels good," she said, her voice soft. "It does," I agreed, pulling her closer. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just starting over. I was starting something better. The months that followed felt like a slow unraveling of the tension I hadn't realized I was still carrying. With Isabel, every moment seemed effortless, like the weight of the past was finally loosening its grip. She didn't ask for perfection or answers to every wound I hadn't fully healed. Instead, she just wanted honesty, and that was something I could give. I began reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd lost along the way. Photography became more than a hobby. It was therapy. On weekends, I'd wander through trails or quiet streets with my camera, capturing simple moments: a robin perched on a fence, a child chasing bubbles, sunlight breaking through the trees. Isabel often joined me, her own curiosity adding a layer of light-heartedness to the outings. One afternoon, we stumbled upon a local art fair. A vendor selling handmade journals caught my eye, and Isabel nudged me toward the table. "You should get one," she said. "For what?" I asked, skeptical. "To write," she said simply. "You have so much in your head, it might help to get some of it out." At first, the idea felt strange. Writing wasn't something I'd done since college essays, and even then, it wasn't exactly a passion. But one evening, as Isabel curled up with a book, I opened the journal and started writing. At first, it was just fragments, thoughts I couldn't say out loud, memories of Claire that still stung, and moments of doubt about moving forward. But over time, the words became a way to measure my progress. I wasn't writing to hold on to the past. I was writing to let it go. The turning point came on a warm spring day, months after that fateful anniversary party. Isabel and I attended a wedding for one of her close friends. It was a small, intimate ceremony, nothing like the grand performative events Claire used to organize. As the bride and groom exchanged vows, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Their words, so raw and sincere, reminded me of what love was supposed to be: honest, imperfect, and chosen every day. During the reception, Isabel and I sat at a table under string lights, her head resting on my shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. I finally get it. Love isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's just about being there. Being present, even when it's messy." She smiled, her hand finding mine. "You've always known that. You just forgot for a little while." Her words struck me deeply. She wasn't trying to fix me or erase my past. She was just reminding me of who I was. As the months passed, I continued to rebuild, not just my life but the way I saw myself. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning to carry the scars without letting them weigh me down. One evening, while Isabel and I were cooking dinner, she turned to me with a mischievous grin. "You know, you've never asked me to move in," she teased. I froze, the knife in my hand hovering over a half-chopped onion. "I didn't want to rush you," I said cautiously. She laughed. "Ethan, if I wasn't ready, I wouldn't have brought it up." Her words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't realize was still closed. "Then let's make it official," I said, grinning back. "Move in with me." She kissed me, the laughter in her eyes making my chest ache in the best way. That night, as we lay in bed, Isabel rested her head on my chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. "You've come so far," she murmured. So have you, I replied. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just reclaiming joy, I was rediscovering it, building it from the ground up with someone who chose to walk beside way. Isabel moved in a month later, and with her came a warmth I hadn't known my home was missing. The house, once a hollow shell of memories I wanted to erase, was now filled with laughter, the smell of her cooking, and little touches that made it ours. A framed photo from one of our hikes, her favorite books tucked into the shelves, fresh flowers on the dining table every week. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. The kind of real I could trust again. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Isabel was sipping tea, her legs curled beneath her on the chair. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, the way the fading light caught the curls in her hair, and smiled. "Every day." "What do you see?" I hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because the answer felt big. Bigger than anything I dared to hope for in a long time. "I see us," I said finally. "Building a life together. Maybe a family. Traveling. Finding all the little joys we've missed along the way." She set her mug down and leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'd like that," she whispered. A year after we met, I proposed to Isabel on a quiet trail overlooking a valley. There was no grand gesture, no audience. Just the two of us, surrounded by nature, the place where we'd first truly connected. Her answer was a tearful yes, and in that moment, the last pieces of my broken heart finally felt whole again. Our wedding was small, intimate, and full of love. It wasn't about putting on a show or impressing anyone, it was about us. As I watched Isabel walk toward me, her smile radiant, I realized how far I'd come. Claire was a chapter in my life, one that had shaped me in ways I couldn't deny. But she wasn't the end of my story. Isabel was the proof of that, standing before me as the life I never thought I'd get to have. Years later, as I tucked our daughter into bed, she looked up at me with the same curious eyes Isabel had. "Daddy, how did you meet Mommy?" she asked. I smiled, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I met her on a hike. She made me laugh when I didn't think I could anymore." "Did you know right away that she was special?" I nodded. "I think I did. Sometimes, life surprises you when you least expect it." She grinned sleepily, snuggling into her pillow. "I'm glad you found her." "Me too," I said, kissing her forehead. As I turned off the light and closed her door, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Life wasn't about the pain I'd endured or the betrayals I'd suffered. It was about the people who stayed, the love I rebuilt, and the future I chose to embrace. With Isabel by my side, I knew one thing for certain. My story wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about everything I'd found.